Nitka, and in this video I'll show you how to make this absolutely stunning merino wool blanket using your arms as your tools. The blanket is big, you can tell it's quite big and chunky and super textured. The size of the blanket is 1 meter by 1.8 meters. That's a lot. That's like 39 by 70 inches, and we would need quite a bit of wool for that. We would need 12 balls of Nitka super chunky merino wool. Then we would need a wool needle and scissors. That's it. Let's do it. To make the blanket chunky, we would use 2 strands of yarn. So take 2 balls, slip the bands off, and then find the end in each ball. To do that, just pull any strand that you see from outside the ball, and you will find the tail. Often it's hidden inside over here, so don't worry if you pull it from there. It's okay. Now align these 2 strands and use 2 strands as one throughout the project. The cast on starts with a slip knot. Make a loop so that the working yarn, the one that comes from the ball, is on top of the yarn tail. Then, without flipping it over, place it on top of the working yarn like this. Get the strand in the middle and the yarn tail and pull it up to create your first stitch. Place it on your left hand. Now let's make more stitches. We need to have 22 stitches altogether. Place the yarn into your left hand, then insert your right hand from left to right into the stitch that you created. Get the yarn, pull it through, let the yarn go with the left hand, it's only in the right hand, and place the new stitch on the left wrist. Adjust the size of the stitch. The stitches for the cast on shouldn't be really too tight, otherwise making your first row would be quite hard. So they shouldn't be loopy either, just this loose is okay. Let's do it again. Place the yarn in your left hand, insert the right hand from left to right into the stitch, get the yarn, and place the new stitch on your left wrist. And keep doing that until you have 22 stitches altogether. And here's the last stitch, the stitch number 22. So I have 22 stitches on my wrist, and now I'm ready to knit them from my left wrist to my right wrist. And this blanket is worked in seed stitch pattern, so we won't be just knitting, we would be also purling. We would be knitting one stitch and purling the next one, and then repeating the same sequence. Knit one, purl one, and so on. Let's get to that. Knit stitch. To knit a stitch from your left hand to your right hand, you would need to place the yarn on your left thumb so that the yarn comes from the work over your thumb and into your left palm, like this. Hold the yarn, then with your right hand, take the first stitch. Remember, each stitch has 2 strands in it. That's because we're using 2 strands of yarn throughout this project. So take your first stitch and pull it over the hand, creating a new stitch. Now insert your right hand from left to right into this new stitch like this, so that your palms meet, and leave it on the right wrist. That was a knit stitch. Now let's purl a stitch. Before we start purling, we need to bring the yarn to the front of the work like this. So the yarn is at the front, you can see it. Now place the yarn on your left index finger, the left thumb, sorry, same way. It goes from your knitting on top of the thumb and into the palm. So this way you have kind of a loop here if you look at it this way. So it should look like a loop. Then do the same thing. Grab the stitch, pull it over, and drop it. Insert your right wrist into this new stitch, same way, so that your palms meet, and leave the stitch on the right wrist. Bring the yarn to the back of the work like this, and when you have 2 stitches on your wrist, pull the yarn to make the stitches really tight. When we cast on, the stitches were a bit loose, just to make it easier to work the first row. But now, in every row that you knit and purl, the stitches should be tight. Let's do it again. Knit stitch. The yarn is on the thumb. Pass the stitch over, drop it, insert the right hand into the new stitch. Pull it to adjust the size. Purl stitch, bring the yarn to the front. Then put it on your thumb, same way, knitting over the thumb and to the palm. And pass the other stitch over and insert the new stitch. Insert the right hand into the new stitch. Bring the yarn to the back and pull tight to make the stitches tighter. Again, knit stitch. The yarn is at the back. Place it on your thumb. Pull the stitch over. Insert the right hand into the stitch. Pull tight. Bring the yarn to the front for the purl stitch. Get it on the thumb. Pull the stitch over. Insert your right hand in there. Yarn to the back and adjust the size of the stitches. Knit stitch again. And the purl stitch. Bring the yarn to the back and pull it to adjust the size. Keep doing that, knitting one stitch and purling the other one up until you have no more stitches on your left wrist. And the last knit stitch, and the last stitch of the row will always be a purl, because we'll be making the same knit one, purl one in every row. Phew, that was quite a row, eh? A lot of things that you need to keep in mind, bringing yarn to the front and to the back, but it's worth it, because this particular seed stitch pattern is really nice for blanket. It's gonna be reversible, and it's gonna be chunky, and it's gonna be squishy, and it's not gonna be as loopy as the regular blanket just when you knit all stitches. So now our left hand is free, and all stitches are transferred on the right hand. So we're gonna change that. In the next row, we'll be transferring stitches from the right hand to the left hand, and we'll be doing that over and over, transferring stitches from one hand to the other and vice versa up until the blanket is done. So that's what's gonna be happening. How to transfer stitches from your right hand to your left hand? Same way, you do knit one, purl one. Knit one, bring the yarn from the knitting on top of your thumb, but this time it's the right thumb, and into your palm. With your left hand, take the first stitch. Remember, it's 2 strands. Take the first stitch, pull it over, let it go. Insert the left hand into this new stitch, same way as we did, so that the palms meet, but because it's the left hand now, we're doing it from right to left, not from left to right. But remember to do it this way, the palms meet. Now the purl stitch. Bring the yarn to the front. Bring the yarn to the front, and again, the yarn comes from your knitting over your thumb and into the palm. This way, again, you create kind of a loop here on your thumb, and you pass this next stitch over and off the hand. Insert the left hand into the new stitch, same way, so that your palms meet. Bring the working yarn back, and now that you have 2 first stitches on your wrist, pull the yarn to adjust the size of the stitch. That's your first knit and first purl in this row. Let's do it again. Knit, purl. Bring the yarn to the front, then onto your thumb, pass it over, insert, bring the yarn to the back of the work and pull tight to adjust the size. Knit again, purl again, pull tight. Remember to pull the yarn after every stitch to adjust the size of the stitch, except for the first stitch. We don't pull the yarn after the first stitch because this way you would tighten up the last stitch of the previous row. So it's better to do the pulling after you have 2 stitches on your wrist, not just 1. But that's only for the first stitch. Keep doing that until you have no more stitches on your right hand. And the last purl stitch in this row, and we are back to where we started. All stitches are on the left hand, but this time we have something growing there, and that's our beautiful, beautiful blanket. Now if you look at your work, you will see that there is a pattern forming already. It's still a bit squished and not easy to see, but you will see that every other stitch that you have, it has a bump. So that's your purl. That's your purl. Because we are doing knit and purl, knit and purl, every other stitch has a bump. And now we repeat same thing over and over and over, bringing stitches from the left hand to the right and then from the right to the left. And we do the same pattern all the time. It's knit 1 stitch, purl 1 stitch, knit 1 stitch, purl 1 stitch. And you insert the other hand, so in this case it's right hand, you insert it always so that the palms meet. That's very important. Otherwise your stitches, your pattern won't look the same as the one in the blanket that I made. Okay, I've been knitting and purling, and I ran out of yarn. See, this one is almost finished, and it's good that I have a tail about 20 centimeters because that's what we need to attach a new ball of yarn. So when this happens, take a new ball of yarn, slip the band off, find the tail same way as we did when we just started. So basically pull the strand outside the ball and you will find the tail. Now to make the join as invisible as possible, do the following. Split the yarn into 2 plies. The length of the split yarn should be about 20 centimeters, 8 inches long. And do the same to the tip that is the old ball of yarn, the one that you've almost finished by now. So do the same, split it like this. Now take 1 strand of the new ball and attach this strand to the strand of the old ball. Let's call it this way, right? Like this, with a simple square knot. Then take the other strand of the new yarn and wrap it around the strand of the old ball, like this. So it looks exactly like the yarn that comes in a ball. It looks twisted like this, up until you come to the second strand of the old ball, and you simply tie these two strands together. And that's it. And then you keep working like you did before. Let these tails hang there, and because it's much easier to deal with them later on when the blanket is done, other than, you know, when you're strangled with the blanket, right? Then you simply cut all those tails, and that's it. It won't be visible at all. And continue knitting and purling. If you are not sure, because you stopped in the middle of the row, if you are not sure which thumb to use to wrap the yarn, it's always the thumb that is the opposite to the yarn. So you see the yarn comes from this side. That means I'm wrapping the right thumb. And knit and purl, knit and purl, same way, and keep repeating those knit and purls, that routine, until you basically run out of yarn, until you attach all the balls that you used for the blanket, and you have just 4 meters of yarn left. We would need that yarn to bind off the stitches, but until then, simply knit and purl, knit and purl, knit and purl. You would need about 3 hours to make the blanket from the beginning to the very end, but it doesn't mean you have to do it all in one shot. When you get tired of knitting, or you want to stop for whatever reason, you can easily do so by transferring stitches that you have on your wrist to any stick or any hanger or any other object that looks like a stick. I prefer to use circular needles, because this way you keep the stitches, like they're long enough to keep the stitches without risking slipping the stitches off. So how do you transfer the stitches if you decided to stop? First, finish the row. You can do it when you have stitches on both wrists. So stop at the end of the row, and then simply hold the stick or the needle or whatever you decide to use, and transfer stitches one by one from the hand to that stick. And very soon you'll be free from stitches, and you can do whatever you please, and then resume knitting whenever you have time to do it. So once you transfer the stitches to that stick or to the needle or to any thick cord, that will also do. So just be creative and find something in your household that could be used to hold your stitches while you decide to stop knitting. Okay, here we go. I have my stitches on the circular needle, so I'm gonna hold it like that, put it in a safe place until I'm ready to resume knitting. When you're ready to start knitting again, you would need to transfer the stitches back from the circular needle or stick or whatever you're using back to your wrist, and you need to do it in such a way that the stitch that has the yarn coming from it should be the closest one to the palm. So first we would see where that stitch is. So in my case it's right here on the far right side. Then that means I would need to transfer stitches starting from the other end, starting from this stitch. Simply slip the stitch onto your wrist without twisting the stitch. Just do it the same way as you did when you slipped the stitch onto the circular needle or the stick. Simply insert your wrist into the stitch in the same way without twisting it, and do it one by one in the same order. Just make sure you don't substitute the stitches, you don't twist them between themselves. that's also no good, and that will show on your blanket. That's why we want to avoid it. So one by one, transfer stitches from the circular needle or the stick back onto your wrist, and then we would be ready to resume knitting. And the last stitch, this is the one that has the yarn coming from it, and this is the one that is the closest to my palm right now. That means we've done all right. And because each row starts with knit 1, you don't have actually to remember which row you are in. Simply knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and repeat the same sequence over and over and over again until your blanket is finished and you have just about 4 meters of yarn left. While the blanket is getting bigger and we're getting less and less yarn, so these are my last 2 balls, and when you have almost worked through the last 2 balls, stop, because we need to estimate whether we'll have enough yarn for binding off. So how do we estimate? We need to have at least 4 meters of yarn, and if you have a ruler, then yeah, use it. If not, just remember that the distance between your thumb and the index finger is about 20 centimeters, 8 inches. So you need to measure 5 times that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your meter. And then you measure 4 times the meter. So that would be obviously 4 meters. So 1, 2, 3, and almost 4. Okay, here we go. So that's how much yarn I would need to bind off, and I still have some yarn left, so I would probably work through the next row and then stop and bind off stitches. So see you in one row. And this is the last purl stitch. Here we go. I wouldn't risk making another row because there is nothing more frustrating than getting out of yarn on your last stitches that you have to bind off. In that case, you would need to undo the whole bind off edge and then undo one more row and then start binding off again, and that's something I want to avoid. So I'd rather have a bit extra yarn left than running out of yarn on the last stitches of bind off. Okay, now that we have that settled and we know that we have enough yarn to bind off, let's do it. So how do we bind off stitches? Basically, we are closing them. And to close the stitches, we would knit 1 stitch and then purl 1 stitch and then tighten them up. Then let the yarn go, don't hold it, and take the first stitch that you knit and pass it over the purl stitch and off your hand, like this. Now you have just 1 stitch left. Knit another stitch, tighten up, and then pass the purl over the knit. Now purl a stitch, 2 stitches on the wrist, pass one over the other and off the end. Knit a stitch, pass it over, purl a stitch, pass it over, and keep doing that until you have just 1 stitch on your wrist, and that's it. See what happens? If you look this way, you would notice that we have a nice edge of nice chain actually of bound off stitches, and that's exactly what we need to have to close the stitches and have a nice edge. So stitch by stitch, knit 1, pass it over, purl 1, pass it over, and keep doing that until, as I said, you have just 1 stitch left. And the last purl stitch, pass it over, and here we go. Just 1 stitch left. Take it off your wrist and put the remaining yarn tail, put it through the stitch like this, and then pull tight to secure. Here we go. The blanket is done. We close the stitches. We have this nice ridge. The blanket is pretty big, but oh my, how soft it is, right? The only thing that we have left to do is to hide the ends and to trim those tails that appeared when we joined the balls of yarn. So let's find them first. Okay, so look at the very start of your blanket and find those little ends like this hanging there and waiting for you to trim them with the scissors. Just trim them as close to the knot as you can. Leave just a bit, but not much really, because you don't want to the tails to show. Then let's look for the next one. Okay, I see it right here. See, here's my knot. I pull it tight and trim it. And do the same until you find and trim all of your tails that are hanging from the places where you joined the yarn. And here seems to be the last one in my knitting. Here we go, just trim it and we're done. So now the blanket is all nice, but we have still the leftover yarn hanging and we have the cast on tail hanging as well. So we're gonna deal with those guys right now. First of all, if you have a lot of yarn left, well, I mean longer than 20 centimeters, then trim the yarn. Trim it so that it's about 10 centimeters, 4 inches, like this. And put the extra yarn aside. We don't need it anymore. Now, split each of those little tails into 2 strands, like we did when we joined the yarn. Then take the wool needle and thread each strand into the wool needle one by one. So 1 strand first, and then pull the needle through any strand that you see in your knitting close to the tail. Somewhere just inside, go inside the strand and pull it through. Then relax the fabric and trim the tail. This one is done. Why do we do that extra step of splitting the tail? Simply because we want it to look neater and we don't want the tails to show in your knitting. Not that somebody would really notice it, because the whole knitting, the blanket is quite loopy itself. But we want to do the perfect job, don't we, right? So go inside the strand and trim the end. And do the same for the next one. And then move to the cast on tail. Trim it as well if needed. If not, simply split 1 strand and then the other, and hide the plies of each strand one by one. And this was the last tail from the cast on edge. And here we go. No tails. Your blanket is all ready. I do hope you enjoyed making it.